We've got the generators in places, both north and south. We've got generators on Charleston and Ruby's here. They're ready. We had the program stood up and has been there for 10 years. They're ready. We had the program stood up and has been there for 10 years.
Has been there for 10 years.
If we get it front through, we need to seat it. Any technical questions, because I just know what they look like. The generators, that is. Thank you. If we get it front through, we need to seat it. If we get it front through, we need to seat it.
If we get it front through, we need to seat it.
Okay, folks, so I want to share some more information here from this report to the President and Congress. National Weather Modification Policies and Programs from 1979. Again, coming from the U.S. Department of Commerce. And when I left off in the last video, I was reading through some of their summary of major findings right here. So I want to kind of continue where I had left off there, where they talk about the summer cumulus clouds. And I think some of the information from these other findings in these next few paragraphs is kind of curious, especially since there are a lot of things going on right now here in the United States, in the Midwest. There's a lot of very wicked storms popping off and causing a lot of catastrophic damage and loss of life. And again, to reiterate, this file here, this report, was filed back in 1979, and in it and several other publications, they have admitted and said they've been doing these types of weather modifications and geoengineering for decades, since the 40s, since at least the mid-40s. So, anyway, just to reiterate as well, to anyone that wants to wonder how they could possibly have been getting away with it all along, I mean, you have to remember as well, let me reiterate and remind y'all, because I'm repetitive, I have to share it again. There is a gag order on Weather Service employees. Okay, they're not allowed to talk about these geoengineering and these weather modification products, and I think that is very, very wrong. And it just, you know, they've tethered other programs and put gag orders on other programs and 50-year secrecy types of things on them, just binding information and facts and data that the public has a right to know. But anyway, in this summary of major findings from this report to the Congress and the President from 1979, it goes on to talk about summer cumulus clouds. Cumulus clouds are even more important than orographic clouds as producers of precipitation and generators of severe weather. Cumulus clouds supply as much as 3/4 of the precipitation in middle latitude crop growing areas and almost all of the precipitation in the tropics. Thus, development of the ability to increase precipitation from cumulus clouds may have the greatest potential payoff of all possible weather modification techniques. However, the complexity of cumulus clouds and their extreme variability in time and space make modification of such clouds a much more complex problem than modification of orographic clouds. The science of seeding cumulus clouds for more precipitation has evolved a good deal over the last 30 years. Okay, let me reiterate. This was a report filed in 1979, so let's go back 30 years from 1979. We have 1949, and they already said in previous publications as early as 1946. So, anyway, two seeding concepts, static seeding and dynamic seeding, have been employed. Static seeding. The static seeding concept was based on the assumptions that cumulus clouds are naturally deficient in ice-forming nuclei, and that the addition of ice-forming nuclei by cloud seeding should bring the ratio of ice crystals to supercooled water to a more efficient balance and result in more precipitation at ground level. Hundreds of commercial projects based on this concept have operated in the United States and other countries, especially during the dry years of the early 1950s. Did y'all know that? It's not exactly something you see on a PBS special, is it? President Eisenhower's, or the History Channel. How many specials on geoengineering and weather modification have you seen on the History Channel compared to the number of movies and documentaries about ancient aliens? President Eisenhower's Advisory Committee on Weather Control investigated several seeding projects over non-mountainous terrain, primarily in the eastern and central parts of the United States. The 1957 report indicated that they were unable to detect any increase in precipitation from these projects, but they urged more studies of cumulus cloud seeding because of the high value they attached to even a small enhancement of precipitation from clouds over agricultural areas. As a consequence of the ACWC recommendations, several randomized cloud seeding projects were initiated. The 1966 NAS report reviewed a number of these projects. Special attention was given to Project White Top, conducted in Missouri from 1960 to 1964 by the University of Chicago with support from the National Science Foundation. There's the good old NSF stepping up to the plate, huh? This project found an increase of 5 to 10% in radar echo frequency just downwind of the seeding location, indicating increased precipitation activity within the clouds. This effect gave way to negative effects of about the same amount beyond 65 to 80 kilometers, about 40 to 50 miles downwind. The net result was a decrease of precipitation in the target area as a result of seeding. The net rainfall decreases in Project White Top were attributed to overseeding in the face of high natural ice particle concentrations. So again, admittedly, this Project White Top overseeded a high natural ice particle concentration and decreased the precipitation from it, directly influencing it. And nobody will ever be held accountable. Another randomized summer cumulus research project was conducted in southern Arizona from 1957 to 1964 by the University of Arizona, also with NSF funding, with the National Science Foundation funding. The results of this project were inconclusive, but less precipitation occurred in the target area for seeded cases than for non-seeded cases. So less precipitation in an area that normally would need the precipitation and would normally use the natural precipitation, the natural ice particles, the natural ice concentrations. This is just more proof that they have been affecting this stuff all along, you know. In the absence of other results from randomized research projects, many of which were still underway, the NAS staff reviewed 14 short-term, non-randomized operational projects conducted in the eastern United States. They found evidence of precipitation increases in the range 0 to 33%. How convenient. Several of them at moderate to low levels of statistical significance. They concluded that these results could not be regarded as conclusive evidence of precipitation increases from cloud seeding, but that they were suggestive of positive effects and warranted some optimism. So again, found conclusive with yet another project, but they're just going to continue forward, right? Because science, right? The 1973 NAS report discussed 2 additional randomized summer cumulus projects that had been completed since the 1966 report. One was a project carried out over the Sierra Nevada range by Fresno State College scientists, where observational evidence suggested that precipitation was stimulated by seeding. However, the project design made no provision for quantitative evaluation of precipitation increases. Again, another flawed science project. Where's the National Science Foundation to step in and say, hey, look, y'all are kind of flubbing up these science experiments here. We're not going to be backing you up for these science experiments if you're going to keep flubbing them up, right? No, of course not. The second project was a long-term, randomized effort carried out on the Necaxa River Basin in central Mexico by the Mexican Light and Power Company. Evaluation of the seeding experiment showed evidence of a strong positive effect, at least in certain categories of precipitation from special meteorological situations. Again, I can understand them continuing forward if they were coming up with information that, was balanced on the risks and the benefits. But they continually came up with conclusive, results that were not conclusive. You know what I mean? I know that sounds silly and oxymoronic, but that's pretty much what it is. They ran all of these projects for so long and kept coming up with all of this inconclusive evidence. I mean, when do you say enough is enough when what you're doing is causing more damage? Seriously. Ugh. The 1973 NAS report also devoted attention to new analysis of the Project White Top data. Several post hoc statistical analysis by outside investigators reported overall decreases in precipitation in the target area and extending in all directions from the target. A final analysis of Project White Top by the original investigators reported that negative effects were associated with southerly low-level winds, while days with westerly winds showed positive effects. They also found, using radar echo top data, that increases in precipitation had occurred when radar tops were between 6,090 and 12,180 meters, about 20 to 40,000 feet. Yeah, so then that gives them the idea of being able to control that part of the equation, right? When equatops were higher, there were decreases in precipitation. Thus, certain conditions for favorable and unfavorable effects due to seeding seem to have been identified. However, other tests are needed to confirm this finding. Yeah, other tests, meaning you simulate that situation, right? You recreate that situation where the southerly low-level winds created this negative effect, and you could create these positive effects with this westerly wind, and you could recreate that wind, right? Recreate that current, right? Anyway, sorry. Dynamic seeding. The concept of dynamic seeding, first suggested in 1948, was developed and used experimentally during the late 1960s. This technique employs massive seeding to convert supercooled liquid water to ice rapidly during the active growth phase of a cloud. Scientists hypothesize that the resulting release of latent heat increases cloud buoyancy, invigorates the cloud and prolongs its lifetime, increases its efficiency, and ultimately enhances rainfall. Several factors were important in making dynamic seeding practical. These included the development of numerical cumulus cloud models that could simulate cloud processes, at least in a crude way, the development of mini-computers, and the development of pyrotechnic seeding devices. Tests of the dynamic seeding concept were conducted in Pennsylvania, Arizona, the Caribbean, and southern Florida during the late 1960s. These tests confirmed the increased growth of the clouds predicted by the numerical cloud models. Subsequently, the effect of dynamic seeding on rainfall in Florida cumulus clouds was investigated by NOAA in two projects in 1968 and 1970. A comparison of radar-measured precipitation from individual seeded and non-seeded clouds showed a 100 to 200% increase in precipitation for seeded clouds. The increase was significant at the 5% level. That is, the hypotheses that there is no difference between the seeded and non-seeded clouds could be rejected, with the probability of being wrong at most 5 times out of 100, and the probability of being right at least 95 times out of 100. Yeah, if you do your dynamic seeding, right? The Florida Area Cumulus Experiment, or FACE, was organized by NOAA in 1970 to determine whether dynamic seeding can be used to augment precipitation from cumulus clouds over an extensive area in South Florida. Exploratory field experiments were conducted during 5 summers from 1970 through 1976. Results from the FACE experiments suggest that under some conditions, dynamic seeding increases rainfall. Because of the multiplicity of ideas examined and the subjective influences of those conducting the experiment, a problem discussed further in Section 2 of this chapter, conditions typical of all exploratory experiments, these conclusions cannot be assigned useful statistical significance levels. Wow. For that reason, a confirmatory Florida experiment was initiated in the summer of 1978. In an area-type summer cumulus cloud experiment conducted in South Dakota from 1969 through 1972 by the South Dakota School of Mines and Technology, statistically significant precipitation increases were reported for days characterized by cumulus showers. On days with large thunderstorms, essentially no seeding effect occurred. The investigators ascribed the results to dynamic seeding, although the seeding rates used were much smaller than those in either the FACE or Caribbean experiments. This points out the fact that there is no hard and fast line between static and dynamic seeding. The South Dakota School of Mines and Technology also conducted a cumulus cloud seeding project for rain enhancement and hail suppression in North Dakota during the summers of 1969 through 1972. The project was randomized by day with silver iodide released into cloud updrafts at the base of the clouds. A recent statistical analysis of this project by the Weather Modification Advisory Board Statistical Task Force indicates that overall differences in rain for seeded and unseeded days were negligible and not significant. However, they found that when seeded days are separated into days judged suitable and unsuitable for dynamic seeding, the mean difference in average rainfall between suitable seeded days and unseeded days approaches statistical significance. So you got to pick the right clouds to seed, right? Like Mr. Goketchia says too. If we see a front, we need to seed it, right? Yeah. Winter cumulus clouds. Randomized tests of seeding winter cumulus clouds for increasing rainfall were carried out in Israel between 1961 and 1967, Phase 1, and between 1969 and 1975, Phase 2. In both experiments, cumulus clouds moving inland from the Mediterranean Sea were seeded from airplanes at relatively high dosage rates. Mind you, again, this is in Israel. Okay. The results of Phase 1 indicated an increase in precipitation of about 15% with statistical significance. When cloud tops were between about minus 10 degrees Celsius or plus 14 degrees Fahrenheit and minus 25 degrees Celsius or minus 13 degrees Fahrenheit. Phase 2, considered to be a confirmatory experiment testing the conclusions of Phase 1, indicated a 13 to 15% increase in rainfall at significance levels of 4% and 9% in two significant tests. That is, the null hypothesis could be rejected with the probability of being wrong at most 4 and 9 times out of 100, respectively. When the results of Phase 2 became known, the Israeli government stopped experimenting and launched a program of operational seeding at every cloud opportunity. A post hoc analysis of effects downwind of the target indicated a positive response to seeding as far as 160 kilometers, about 100 miles downwind. The Weather Modification Advisory Board Statistical Task Force reviewed the only report thus far published about Phase 2 of the Israeli project. They concluded that if closer critical analysis of the study and its data fails to detect flaws, the results of this study would be judged to constitute confirmatory evidence that rainfall amounts have been increased by cloud seeding. The Statistical Task Force's report to the Weather Modification Advisory Board is included as Appendix G to this report. So, let's see. Yeah, and of course, it's available for purchase. Appendix G. The Management of Weather Resources, Volume 2, the Role of Statistics in Weather Resources Management. Yeah, of course, it's available for purchase, right? Yeah. Let's see here. The closest analogs of the Israeli-type cloud systems in this country appear to be the winter cyclonic storms along the California coast and in the Pacific Northwest. These storms are known to contain numerous convective rain bands within which the highest intensity precipitation is located. So, that would be that atmospheric river that flows in out there from the west, right? A randomized seeding project involving this type of winter cloud was carried out by Aerometric Research Incorporated near Santa Barbara, California during the period between 1967 and 1974. During the first 4 years, Phase 1, seeding was accomplished by a high-output pyrotechnic device at a single site on a 1,000-meter, about 3,280-foot ridgeline. The emphasis was on seeding individual convection bands embedded within winter cyclonic storms. Seeding was randomized band by band. Analysis of Phase 1 indicated precipitation increases of 50% or greater from seeded bands at high levels of statistical significance. There was also indication of up to 50% precipitation increases extending 160 kilometers, about 100 miles downwind of the generator site. Phase 2 shifted the scene of action 100 kilometers, about 62 miles to the west, and further explored the downwind effects. Seeding was carried out from aircraft flying within convective bands upwind of the target area. Seeding was randomized in 48-hour periods, but the test was abandoned before an adequate sample was collected. Rainfall in the target area in a region extending 250 kilometers, about 155 miles downwind, was reported to have been increased 50% or more by seeding. Although Phase 2 was terminated before any statistical significance could reasonably be anticipated, the results of Phase 2 suggest that the dynamic effect was realized in the seeded precipitation bands. Wow. So it was terminated. I'll go into that in another video and try to find out a little bit more details and information and go through my files to find out some more information on some hail suppression as well before I go into more of this summary of major findings. But I'm going to go ahead and end this video now and try to get it uploaded. And I still want to share a little bit more information about the withdrawal from WHO as well, because I did come across my file and the report that was filed on the origins of COVID as well, because there's some interesting rhetoric and propaganda written into it that I want to share as well. So that's going to be another video. And the next part, I'll go into a little bit about hail suppression, and I'll try to find some of my other documents on some of the other projects that are associated with hail suppression as well. So thank you for watching. Know that I appreciate it and that you matter very much to me. And please stay safe and mindful. There's so much going on right now all at once. It's just kind of a good time to have some good situational awareness, so to speak.
It calls for us taking the steps now that will make us no longer second in space and size. It lays the predicate and the foundation for a space communication satellite that will permit the people of the world to see one television program at the same time throughout the world. Think about that kind of communication, and think about the opportunity that will provide. It lays the predicate and the foundation for the development of a weather satellite that will permit man to determine the world's cloud layer